guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Two, check. How's it going, folks? Hello. Benny, thank you for the raid. Benny and the Dolls. Sounds like a good, 70s kind of glam rock outfit. I saw Dakadoon. First we got the Michaels fighting, and now we got Hall and Oates fighting as well. Like, what the fuck's going on here? What is going on here? What is the world coming to? Michael versus Michael. Hall versus Oates. Horrible. It's a sad state of affairs. How's everybody doing? How are you doing? How are you doing, friends? You must pick a side, that's right. There's no more fence sitting. No more fence sitting, okay? How's everybody doing? I'm actually not doing well. I regret to inform you. I regret to inform you that I'm not doing well at all, and I've messed up my hair. I'm not doing well. I was talking yesterday about some pain I was having in my finger, the joint of my finger / my hand.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Oh, here they come. Watch out, they'll spy on you. Oh, here they come. They're the two Michaels.
They're the two Michaels. Thanks, King Window, for the 37 months and for all the support. Thank you. I appreciate that. King Window. I was mentioning yesterday that... Oh, God. I have like a hat head, too, because I was just outside. I was mentioning yesterday that I was having pain in my hand. And it was uncomfortable. It was painful, but it wasn't like unbearable or anything. And just since yesterday, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. So I don't even totally know like how long I can do this today. I really don't know. It's like I'm in really bad pain. Like if I can just stay still, it's not so bad, but it's like my fucking right hand. It's useless. My right hand is useless right now. I can barely use my mouse. I can't type. I can't feed myself. I can't cook anything. I can't do the dishes. I can't do shit right now. You know? And it's really frustrating. Like these physical issues that I have, like it's not all the time. It's probably a couple weeks out of the year that I feel this way. Like just 2 days ago, I felt totally fine. I got full mobility issues. I feel mostly okay. And then just like out of nowhere, I get this like horrendous pain and swelling. And it just comes out of nowhere and it's just debilitating. Like it's either in my feet or my hands. And like pick what the best option is for that. I can either not walk or I can't use my right hand. It's really frustrating, you know? It's like I'm choosing right now. Like, what would I rather have? When I have really bad pain in my foot, I think, man, I would give pretty much anything to not have this pain in my foot. But right now, I'd probably trade if I could. I would probably trade my hand for my foot. Because it's like, when you can't walk, that's one thing. Right now, I'm walking totally fine. But it's like, it's my right hand. I can't fucking do anything. I can't change my clothes. Like, I haven't taken a shower. I haven't eaten anything. You know, it's fucked. I can barely even... I can't type. I can't use my mouse. My hand is just completely useless. Like, I just got a new phone finally. I got a new phone. It was like a Black Friday, so I got like a Black Friday deal for like a free phone from Bell. I had to like sell my soul to Bell to get a new phone for free, the Pixel 7. And I was just like trying to put the SIM card in the phone. I have to like get a new SIM card, and I'm putting the SIM card in my phone. And that's hard enough. It's hard enough to do that. And I fucking, you know, in your phone, it has this little like metal tray where you put the SIM card, right? And I dropped it because I'm using my left hand mostly. I dropped it and it just like bounced on the floor and just bounced right under my sofa. And I was crying. I just started crying because it's like, it's normally, it's not a huge problem, right? Just to go and reach under your fucking sofa to get something. But it's like, I can't do it. I can't do anything. So I had to like move that out of the way and like grab that and fix that. You know, like I said, I haven't eaten anything. I haven't taken a shower. Like I can't do anything right now. It's really frustrating. I'll probably like, I don't know. Usually when this shit happens, I try to deal with it myself and then see if I can get it to go down with like Advil and whatever else. But like if I doesn't start getting better, I got to go to the doctor. I probably do have to get some kind of diagnosis because it's probably not good or normal to just like all of a sudden get extreme pain flare-ups in your body that make it completely like unable to do anything, accomplish anything.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Diego, for the 2 gifted subs. That's very kind of you. It doesn't make my hand hurt less, but it's very nice of you. Sudden swelling sounds like arthritis. Yeah, it's some form of arthritis. Like, as I've talked about before, I have gout and mostly in my feet. I don't often get it in my hands like this, and it's not like it hurts, but it's not swollen like it normally is when I have like flare-ups of that. It's not like that red and swollen feeling. It's just my hand looks mostly normal, but it feels like it got crushed. Like, it feels like it got run over by a car. It feels like someone hit it with a hammer. It feels like someone stabbed it with a knife. It feels like it got crushed in like one of those industrial press things. Like, that's what it feels like right now.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Looks like we made it.
Oh shit, 10,000 sandwiches. Thank you so much for 36 months, tier 2. Thank you, 10,000 sandwiches. 36 whole months. From our friend, 10,000 sandwiches. That's so many sandwiches. Congratulations on the brand new and highly exclusive Pearl sub badge. Congratulations to you. Anyway, I wanted to still stream today. It's a special day. It's JFK Day. It's JFK Assassination Day, which is a big day in the lore of this program. So, Allen Dulles Day, the day that JFK was COUP'd. JFK was COUP'd by the pro-Nazi faction of the United States intelligence and security apparatus, led by Allen Dulles. Who is then a one of the main people that put on the Warren Commission that investigated the assassination. Which should just indicate to anybody, that the whole thing is just a total farce. So, I wanted to come on and talk about that. Maybe I won't be able to do the whole stream. Like, I don't know. I don't totally know. It's hard for me to think about anything right now, honestly. Like, it's hard. Like, I don't know. It's difficult. Like, I'm still wearing the same shirt I was wearing yesterday. But, like, there's stuff that we can look at. There's that whole Michael Parenti speech on JFK, which we've watched before. We've watched it before, but I think it was about 2 years ago, so I think it's probably worth it to check that out again. I've taken pain meds, just Advil. I'm about due for another round of those. I would like some stronger stuff, though, I gotta say. Like, right now is a time that I would probably like the harder stuff at this time. I just hope I can fix it, man. It's debilitating. I can't do anything. And it's like I feel lucky at the same time, it's a couple weeks out of the year that I have really a bad time. I have hard to be mobile, where I have issues like right now. It seems a little like it's getting more and more every single year, so I guess that's something I got to deal with. But I do feel lucky that I don't deal with this stuff every single day of my life, which many people do. Anyway, sorry to complain. You know, I know it's not really entertaining for people to tune in here and just have me complain about my physical ailments, but it's hard. It's kind of hard to think about anything else right now because there's like
You can count on me.
like
You're gonna
from
have
this
good old
going
Rob
down here.
to talk
There's
you through
just
all
like
this.
this like extreme pain just radiating from that area, just throbbing. Like I can feel my heartbeat in it. Sadly, I have a bunch of food to prep, so I can't hang out, but I just wanted to swing by and celebrate 3 years of Friendship Triangle. Hope you get your hand taken care of. Rooting for you. And Chad, I love you. Thank you, 10,000 sandwiches. I'm glad you could stop by. We got prepping some Thanksgiving food. I know you've probably done every home remedy for that sort of thing. What was the weirdest one you tried? I don't know. Nothing that weird. It's like there's a bunch of foods that are supposed to help, but I've never really had any like success with that. Oh, and Gwynny, thanks for the gifted sub. Thank you, Gwynny. The frustration is normal, especially when it's literally everything else, and then on top of that, your hand starts up. Yeah. Oh, it was rough. Yeah, and I was like dealing with it last night, and I was icing it, and you know, it's like I went to sleep at night. It's like, oh, maybe in the morning it's going to be the swelling will be down, or it's going to feel better, and it was worse. You wake up and it's worse. It's just gotten worse and worse and worse over the last. It really sucks. Sometimes I want to cut my arm or leg off when they get very bad, but I'm not sure if that would help. Yeah, I have the same like urge, honestly. Like I'm sure if I just cut the part of my hand off that hurts right now, if I just went into my kitchen and got like a big knife and just like chopped it off, it would probably hurt more than it does now, but like I can't imagine it would hurt much more. You know? Like sure, it probably would. I don't know though. I'm honestly not sure. Don't do the science. Let's not try and find out. If it solved the problem, create a few more, but solve that problem. Yeah, just carterize it on the old stove. So if you'll forgive me, I'm just going to dispense with like the chit chat and stuff. Let's just get down to business here. See how long I can do this for. No shame if you got to call it early either. Wouldn't want you to overextend yourself. And who'd be able to tell us about how JFK's head simply did that? Yeah, I don't even know how to get started. We've talked about this so much on the stream. That's why it's become such a part of the lore of the show. Where to even begin? You know, I always do enjoy like watching the clips from the movie. What's pregabalin, Sean? Is that like a pain thing? Okay. Sounds interesting. I was wondering how I could like get started talking about this. I just put out a tweet. Where's my window? Where's my window? This is the fundamental part of this case. Right? It's all in here. And if you read even like the first couple of chapters of this book, I haven't even finished it. I've read the first part of it. If you even just read the beginning of this book, you kind of understand who the factions are that we're talking about here. You understand the motive. You understand the primary people that were involved in this conspiracy. And it's pretty clear, you know? I don't even think it should be even that controversial to point this stuff out anymore. Obviously, there's still people that are kind of very wedded to the version of reality that we've been sold about America and what America is all about and American democracy and who has power in the United States government. And you can get into all kinds of details about this, like was there one shooter? Was it Oswald? Was it someone else? The grassy knoll, whatever it is. Was Oswald just a patsy? Was he one of the shooters? You know? This is overall, I mean, we can speculate on this kind of things, but overall, you can, regardless of the details, the specific details, we're talking about a coup d'etat that was led by this faction of the United States government, of which Alan Dulles was kind of the leader. You know, the Devil's Chessboard is really just all about, you know, Alan Dulles' actions during the final few months of the war, recruiting all these SS guys into the intelligence apparatus. They had clashed, obviously. JFK and Alan Dulles had clashed over the Bay of Pigs, and people talk about JFK. Well, why would they coup JFK? He was an anti-communist. He was an imperialist. Look what JFK was doing. They were involved with Bay of Pigs, Bay of Pigs. But it's like, I think that's a part of the story because that was an operation that was like supported by this faction. I think they were expecting JFK to send in the troops, which he did not do. It turned into a whole debacle. JFK was humiliated by this. This is one of the first like foreign policy humiliations of his administration. And at that point tried to wrestle back power from this wing of the intelligence committee, which had power basically over every administration. Fired Alan Dulles from the CIA, who then just went into like basically like leading this kind of faction, leading the intelligence community, but from outside instead of within. And you look at what changed in the U.S. government after this, and the idea that JFK had wanted to, according to what most people have learned about this, did not want to continue escalating in Vietnam. Who had a different vision for foreign policy. Yeah, he was an imperialist. He was anti-communist. You couldn't manage a post office in the United States government if you weren't an anti-communist. So absolutely, JFK was not some saint. He wasn't he wasn't a socialist, certainly. He wasn't even really a good person, you could argue. But someone who did have a different vision for what American policy was supposed to look like. who had a different vision for like how America should be engaging with the rest of the world, specifically the third world. You know, had a different vision for like how America should treat these kind of post-colonial movements. Versus this wing of the party that wanted to just go full speed ahead and commit genocide in Southeast Asia and violently overthrow and ruthlessly crush every single one of these like post-colonial movements that was primarily led by socialists. He went woke. That's right. But I think that's one thing that trips people up about this, right? Are you saying JFK was some kind of saint? Was he not an imperialist? Did he not do bad things? Of course he was. Absolutely. But still, I think you can just judge from his speeches, from the things that he said and did, had a different vision about what American foreign policy should be. Well, he started the Vietnam War. I mean, I guess you could say that, but also was trying not to escalate it. And had every intention, from what we understand, of pulling back troops, pulling out advisors, and then as soon as he was gotten out of the way, you have the Gulf of Tonkin incident. You have this dramatic escalation. 65 is when it really kicked off in earnest. Like if it was already going on before that, you're not wrong about that at all. But in 65 is when it really escalated. And just through his speeches, through his correspondences with other like world leaders, definitely had a different idea. Do you see this shit? Different idea of what kind of American foreign policy would be. And thought that it was going to actually harm America to try and come down with brute strength on all these post-colonial movements. JFK, the film, is really worth the watch because a lot of the theories about this, like I believe Devil's Chessboard was a big part of like creating this, or just crafting this kind of narrative. Devil's Chessboard. It's kind of the thing that informs a lot of the theories that are advanced in this film. Is that the one where the CIA people's eyes are black? No, that's Nixon. In both Oliver Stone's JFK and Nixon, you see this wing of the United States government, the security state, the intelligence apparatus, and you see them operating outside of who's supposed to be in charge in both those cases in different ways. In JFK, they get rid of him in this coup d'etat, and you can argue. And Nixon also not a good person. Nixon also a criminal and an imperialist. So when you talk about the ways that both JFK and Nixon clashed with the CIA and the intelligence community and had dealt with repercussions as a result, it's not whitewashing anything about either of those two guys. It isn't. But it teaches us something, fighting the deep state. It teaches us something about who has power in the United States government. And the United States talks about how it has all these democratic values and people have input into the government by voting for the president. But you don't actually have any input if there's a wing of the government that is totally able to change policy, like regardless of who is actually at the helm, who is being voted into the White House, and who can use their influence and their power to remove people, whether it's JFK or whether it's Nixon. And I think a lot of the JFK also, just as bad, inadvertently serves to obscure the important evidence about how the state functions. Let's let's look at this clip. This is one of the most important clips from this film. And this is like, I think, one of the central arguments about this shooting, which is that Oswald couldn't have done it. And that's the question. Like, was Oswald one of the shooters? Was he just a patsy? Possibly. Like, we can speculate that all we want. It doesn't really change anything. The central aspect of this case, could Oswald have done the shooting? Like, maybe. But the Zapruder film, I think, without the Zapruder film, this story would be a lot easier to swallow. The Zapruder film, I think, conclusively, in my view, just using your own judgment, your own two eyes, completely discredits the story that Oswald was the shooter. Who was behind Kennedy as he was traveling away. And you look at the Zapruder film, and that's the whole thing in this movie, right? Back and to the left. From the grassy knoll, the fence by the grassy knoll. And that's the whole thing about the shooting, right? You watch the film, and according to the official story from the Warren Commission, only 3 shots were fired. And 1 wildly missed. 1 hit Kennedy in the back, the upper back, which exited his throat, and then went and hit the governor of Texas like 5 different times. And then the final shot hit Kennedy in the back of the head, causing him to have a big gunshot go off in the front of his head and the whole back of his head to be basically missing when the autopsy happened. His whole brain was falling out the back of his head. So was Oswald one of those shooters? Possibly, maybe. The thing that I kind of think about this was that Oswald thought that he was part of some operation to frame pro-Castro extremists as being part of an attempted assassination. And then when he saw that Kennedy was actually assassinated, realized, oh fuck, I'm the one holding the bag here. I'm the fall guy for this. Whether he was a patsy or a co-conspirator is sort of not that important. No, because like the whole point is that if he's not the only shooter, and there's the evidence that he was one shooter, lone gunman, is, so it just stretches the imagination so much. So if you accept that he wasn't the lone shooter, that means there's a conspiracy and a cover-up. You know? Here's this clip. And if there's a 4th shot and a second rifle, then it's a conspiracy. And again, the very fact that Alan Dulles was on the Warren Commission in the first place. Why didn't we have a JFK movie now? I don't know. It is really long. It's like 3.5 hours long. And it's just like, you can really watch just the clips, you know, and you can get the crux of the case. It's worth watching the movie, definitely. And I would like to watch it sometime, but like you can look at all the relevant clips in like 45 minutes and kind of get the same experience. Although I do recommend people watch it because it is really good. Where was the sorry? Here's the clip from Nixon that Diego recommended that we take a look at.
Pissed Cuba away to the Russians. Just pissed it away. And he doesn't know what the hell he's doing in Vietnam. These are dangerous times, Dig. Especially for business.
Agreed.
We know what you tried to do for Cuba, Mr. Nixon. If you'd been elected in 60, Castro...
Anthony Hopkins is so good in this.
Gentlemen, I tried. I told Kennedy to go into Cuba. He heard me and he made his decision. I appreciate your sentiments, and I've heard them from many fine Cuban patriots, but it's nothing I can do anything about. Now, it's a long drive back to Dallas, and Trini and I have an early plane to catch tomorrow. So,
Dig, these boys want you to run.
absolutely.
That's right. Now, they're serious. They can deliver the South, and they can put Texas in your column. They would have done it in 60.
Only if Kennedy dumps Johnson. That'll never happen.
I don't think you know how much people hate Kennedy down here. Hell, he's coming to town tomorrow, and I guarantee you they will run his ass out of town on a rail.
Damn right. It's true.
Now, we are willing to give you a shit pot full of money to get rid of him. More than you ever dreamed of.
Nobody's gonna beat Kennedy in '64 with all the money in the world.
Suppose Kennedy don't run in '64.
Not a chance. Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I promised my wife I'm out of politics.
You just came down here for the weather, is that right, Mr. Nixon?
I came down here to close a deal for Studebaker.
What about 68, Dick?
5 years to Nick.
Dan Hedaya, another
Politics,
legendary character actor.
eternity.
Dick, your country needs you.
Unfortunately, the country's not available right now.
Okay. So again, we've listened to this lecture before. See if I can find it. The JFK assassination and
I've been looking at it.
State from our boy Michael Parenti. And I'll just take a brief moment to let people know that if you enjoy this show, if you're tuning in for the first time, if you're a longtime viewer or watcher or listener, if you can, please support TRRS with a sub or a gifted sub or bits or whatever you can muster. I don't totally know how much longer I can do this today. I'm really having a rough time. I'm going to make it through this, but if you do enjoy the show, you want to support the work that I do here on twitch.tv, please subscribe if you can. Every little bit helps. It's the only way that I'm able to keep doing this program is through the generosity of the community members. So if you can, please subscribe. Oh, here's the Castro speech, which seems really interesting.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I don't think I want to read the whole thing. I haven't had a chance to look for the relevant parts, but I will link it in the chat. Thanks, Matt, for sharing that. And I'll link it in the chat if people want to check it out. This is the next day, right? This is November 23rd? Yeah. I like as well that, Castro recognizes the hostility toward the U.S. Thanks, Comrade Bushy, for the gifted sub. It would be good to have a reader to read it in Castro's voice. That would be fun. I really appreciate that, Comrade Bushy.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Viva Viva Palestina Palestine.
And thank you, Ian DJ Cooper, as well. I do like that even though that Cuba and America were enemies and Cuba had been dealt with a lot of obstruction and hostility from the United States, but still Castro recognized that Kennedy's assassination was a really bad thing, and I had a lot of sympathy for it. I think that's really fascinating. It says, "We have been victims of the constant hostility of the United States. And among the rulers and the leading men of the United States, there falls on Kennedy an important responsibility in these events. Nevertheless, the news of the murder of the President of the United States is serious news and bad news. We should analyze it thoroughly in order to understand it. Above all, analyze it serenely and dispassionately, as revolutionaries should analyze these things. I say it is bad news, leaving aside the human question, in that the sensitivity of man, any man, is affected by an act of this nature, by a crime, by a murder. I say that, leaving these questions aside, I always react, and I am sure that this is the reaction of the immense majority of human beings. We always react with repulsion towards murder and towards crime. We cannot consider this to be a correct weapon of struggle. No, we cannot consider that. Above all, under the conditions in which it happened, because like all these things, it is always necessary to consider the atmosphere, the things, the circumstances. In other settings, under other circumstances, whatever they may be in a normal situation, in a peaceful situation, a deed of this nature is never justifiable. Especially in the middle of a crowd, in the presence of women, all these things, which above all, I say, are the circumstances that lead us to take a condemnatory attitude towards something, even though some deeds of a political nature, some crimes of a political nature, may or may not be justified. In the circumstances that surrounded the assassination of President Kennedy, we believe it has no justification. But analyzing the question from the political objective point of view, I also said it was serious news, bad news. And some will ask why. Why precisely the Cubans, who have received so much aggressions on the part of the United States and from the Kennedy administration itself, why can they say it's bad news? Why can they take an attitude of this kind in the face of this news? But in the first place, we Cubans must react as revolutionaries. In the second place, we Cubans as conscious revolutionaries should not confuse men with systems. And we have to begin by considering that we do not hate men, we hate systems. We hate the imperialist system. We hate the capitalist system. But that does not mean that we hate men as such, as individuals, part of a machine, a more or less important part of a system. So we should not confuse hatred of a system with the sentiment which should harbor toward men, which is a different sentiment. It's not a sentiment of hatred, and much less a sentiment of hatred, which in a case like this would be despicable. Anyway, there's plenty more stuff to look at in there. I really recommend people check that out. Yeah, it's really the Michael Brooks thing. You be kind towards people, ruthless towards systems. Anyway, here's the Michael Parenti speech. Put that on now. Make sure it's not too loud. Okay.
History, and I've been impressed and depressed by the fact that history is really a chronicle of immense atrocities. It's that what we have in history is the fact that when surplus value develops, when there's more than a subsistence economy, you have some portion of the population that will do everything it can to enslave and to expropriate the labor of the rest of the people. Whether it's a slave society, as in ancient Greece and Rome, or feudal society where people were reduced to serfs, or in a capitalist society where people are driven to the edge of insecurity and made to work faster and harder. And one of the things that's used in that arrangement is a very conscious instrument of control that's very necessary. And that instrument is called the state. That is, what they do is set up a state, an organization that has as Max Weber, who wasn't a Marxist, as Max Weber called it, an organization that has a monopoly on the legitimate uses of force and violence, on the use of legitimate force and violence. But that's what we have today. We also have developed in modern times some democratic features, some means of trying to fight back and restrain this arbitrary power, this use of power for the sheer sake of exploiting and people for self-enrichment of a small elite. What are we trying to say is that along with government, we also have a thing called the state. And along with governance, along with policies, and along with those things, we have this other instrument, even in a democratic state, whether it's in democratic France, or democratic England, or democratic Germany, or democratic Italy, or democratic USA, or democratic Canada. In all these countries, all of them have these other instruments and agencies that act like a bunch of gangsters, that act repressively, that use surveillance, that use every dirty trick in the book, unequal enforcement of tax laws, name it. The bringing in of drugs into whole neighborhoods and communities, trumped up murder charges, assassination. And that you have in the middle of these democracies, you have the state within the state known as the national security state. And that state is capable of the most unspeakable crimes that you can think of. And those crimes are perpetrated against their own people. They're perpetrated against people all around the world. Not long ago, I got a letter from a woman who's been a community organizer in Chicago. And she said with grief in her heart, she said, I remember the 60s. I remember the tremendous democratic organization and leadership that was developing in the Latino and African American communities. And I remember those leaders, and every single one of them today is either dead, shot by the police, or in Marion prison on trumped-up charges. And I remember the demoralization that took place, the shattering of those organizations. And after those organizations were shattered and demoralized, then in came the drug traffickers. And those drug traffickers, the thing I remember the most about them is that they were aided and abetted by the federal agents themselves. And this is what happens. That is, we are dealing with a state that was engaged in domestic counterinsurgency. And it was...
That's an interesting thing about the whole aspect of this kind of coup d'etat as well. When you have, you know, not only do you have this escalation in Vietnam and Indonesia and Latin America and all this kind of like genocidal anti-communist violence, but then you also have like the Civil Rights Act. You know, you also have assassinations of like prominent civil rights leaders like Malcolm X, like MLK, but then you have the Civil Rights Act that they pass. And then almost in conjunction with the Civil Rights Act, you have this huge militarization of the police. You've got these draconian drug laws that are passed, and you have drugs flooding into all these different neighborhoods where you then legalize, basically legalize all these apparatuses to militarily occupy all these neighborhoods, to imprison millions of people, predominantly or disproportionately people of color, and political activists as well. You know what I mean? It's like it's sleight of hand. You pass the civil rights legislation. Look, we did it. And boomers are still bragging about this to this day. People like Joe Biden, who's too old to be a boomer. Like, that's how fucking old Biden is. He's not even a boomer, but he has a boomer mentality. And to this day, they still brag about that. We marched, and the Civil Rights Act got passed, and then we went home. And then what happened after? That's always the question. So Kwame Ture asks us as well, right? I was there. But then what did you do next? And if you went home, as a lot of these like white boomers did, and then ended up moving to the suburbs, after that civil rights legislation that they still brag about to this day, you have this draconian mass militarization of police, drug laws, mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow, all that stuff immediately kicks into high gear. And to talk about the CIA and their role in Kennedy, and then you have the CIA flooding crack cocaine into inner city neighborhoods in Los Angeles and other places around America as well.
More interested in having a population that was unorganized and demoralized than a population that was organized, that was effectively fighting for its democratic rights. Because if it's organized and it's effective and it's powerful, it will start making demands and start pursuing its interests, and it will start cutting in on the interests that those police and those coppers and those undercover people and those forces of military and law and order are dedicated to protecting the status quo, protecting those with property against those who don't have it. And by the way, for the last 1,000 years, we've had theorists who've made that point, except they make it proudly. Adam Smith said, as the divisions of property become increasingly unequal, it is more and more necessary to have a state to defend those who have property from those who do not. John Locke, the purpose of the state is to defend those who have property from those who do not. James Harrington, you can go on, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. The only difference was that when Marx said it, he said to defend those who have property from those whose labor is expropriated by those who accumulate wealth off their labor, who have all the property. He changed it a little bit. And he said it wasn't just haves and have-nots, it was haves taking it from those who produced it and created the haves. And throughout the world, dominant economic interests today have enlisted the efforts of assassins and torturers. As we talk at this moment, the CIA and other such agencies in this country and other countries have sponsored violence, torture, death squads, drugs, in scores of countries, from Zaire to Angola to Mozambique to El Salvador to Guatemala to Indonesia to East Timor, and you go on, all through to Western Europe, to the USA, to Chicago and Detroit and Boston and New York. They have systematically targeted, in many countries, the clergy, the peasant leaders, intellectuals, journalists, student leaders, labor union leaders, workers, and any community activists and such. Tens of thousands have been murdered and assassinated to prevent social change, to destroy any kind of redistributive politics, any kind of government, any kind of social movement that is not willing to reduce its people to economic fodder. And with NAFTA, with the North American Free Trade Agreement, we now see the third worldization of the USA will continue full speed ahead. The gangster nature of the state is cloaked by the democratic facade and by the democratic substance of the government. I mean, there is some democratic substance there. Democratic victories have been won, we have struggled, and certain things have been won. And yet in the midst of this state still goes on. And what is so compelling about an issue like drugs, as Michael Levine was pointing out, is that it's not that we're saying the government is not doing enough about drugs, or that we're losing the war against drugs. It's that the government or elements in it are active perpetrators and purveyors of drugs. And what it is so compelling about the JFK assassination is how nakedly the gangster nature of the state is revealed. It is an awakening. And to know the truth about the JFK assassination is to create a delegitimating force that calls into question the entire state system and the entire social order it represents.
We got to just take a brief moment because there's some breaking news here. There's some breaking news about this car bomb that went off in Niagara Falls. Apparently. We interrupt this broadcast with some breaking news.
Yes. Oh, here we go. Alexis McAdams is reporting that according to high-level police sources, the explosion was an attempted terrorist attack. A lot of explosives in the vehicle at the time. The two people who were in the car are deceased. One Border Patrol officer was injured. Driving from the U.S. apparently to Canada, and we're trying to drive toward the CBP building. So all bridges in the area have been closed. All government buildings in the area have been evacuated. Yes. Oh, here we go. Alexis McAdams.
Possible car bomb from the Canadian side of the Niagara Falls Rainbow Bridge. Now, who knows what to make of this? Sounds like Wednesday in the U.S. What are you Canadians crying about? Well, that was a Fox News report. So it's more, it seems like they're Americans that are crying about it. I guess we'll just wait to see if more information comes out about this. It'd be useless to speculate on it right now. Back to our regularly scheduled programming.
And this is why for 30 years the mainstream press has suppressed or dismissed out of hand the findings about JFK's death. The findings of independent investigators like Peter Dale Scott, Harold Weisberg, Carl Oglesby, Mark Lane, Anthony Summers, Philip Melanson, Jim Garrison, Cyril Wecht, and dozens of others. They're called assassination buffs. They're not buffs. Even that word is a limiting and marginalizing and diminishing term. A buff is a kind of a hobby pursuer, you see. It's a kind of a quirky person who follows quirky little interests. Would you talk about Holocaust buffs, would you? No. They are serious investigators of a very serious crime, which leads to all sorts of serious understandings about the criminal nature of the state. And this is why they relentlessly, the mainstream media and the opinion leaders and the political leaders of this country, relentlessly attack or ignore this literature. And this is why they give fulsome, gushing, ready publicity to the likes of Gerald Posner with his book Case Closed, which got put into every major magazine. I couldn't put the TV on all week without seeing this guy's face and hearing him blather these kind of cliche statements whose credibility are dependent on you being totally ignorant of what the investigators for 30 years have been uncovering and the questions that have been raising. And who did a grotesque, idiotic whitewash of the whole thing. And this is why they savaged Oliver Stone's movie JFK, a movie that was very accurate about the specifics of the murder, a movie that reached millions of people, that broke through that thing that they were keeping down. The only movie in the history of Hollywood, and I wrote a book called Make Believe Media, which is about TV and film, so I think I know something about films. At least I did spend the better part of a year reading a lot of literature. It's the only movie that I know of that was attacked 6 months before it was ever released. In the Washington Post and in the New York Times and in Time and Newsweek, and attacked relentlessly for a year after it was released. And this is also why in this past week they kept up the relentless propaganda campaign with the 30th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination to show that Oswald was the lone assassin.
Yeah, so
and they're always limiting the question, just as the Warren Commission did a priori, was Oswald the lone assassin? Did he act alone? Did he or did he not act alone?
I'll be right back.
Meanwhile, all the serious investigators have a different question. It's not that. He was not at all one of the people who shot Kennedy. He did not act at all, although he was involved in another way. He was involved as a fall guy. And this is why they do this. If you want to know why, you just listen to them. It's not my analysis, it's what they say. The propagandists of the right and the center know why they've got to trash this issue and contain it. Listen to what Tom Wicker of the New York Times had to say. Now, Tom Wicker has never written a book review in his life. But when JFK came out, he wrote a book review. A movie review, I'm sorry. He's never written a movie review in his life. JFK came out, and Tom Wicker, who was a columnist, a Washington columnist for the New York Times, suddenly became a movie reviewer. And instead of getting the usual movie review length of 800 words, he got 2,000 words. It's a whole page with pictures and all that. And in that review, he tells us that if the, quote, wild assertions in Oliver Stone's movie are taken at face value, Americans will have to accept the idea that most of the nation's major institutions conspired together and carried out Kennedy's murder. In an era, Wicker goes on, in an era when mistrust of government and loss of confidence in institutions, the press not the least, are widespread and virulent, such a suggestion seems a dubious public service. So truth or not truth has nothing to do with it. He's saying the question is institutional legitimacy. Wicker understands the heart of the matter. A full revelation about the murder would be a serious attack upon the legitimacy of the dominant institutions of state and class, the press not being the least of one of those institutions, a faithful servant of it. The system that New York Times writers faithfully defend. Playing before mass audiences, the movie JFK did not finger a cabal of malevolent perpetrators, but in fact pointed the finger at the national security state itself as the murderer. Damage control. You know, back in 1978, the House Select Committee reported, in fact, after an investigation, that there was more than one assassin shooting Kennedy, and therefore was a conspiracy. In response, the Washington Post immediately editorialized, quote, "Could it have been some other malcontent who Mr. Oswald met casually?" It gets better. Wait. Could not as many as 3 or 4 societal outcasts with no ties to any one organization have developed in some spontaneous way a common determination to express their alienation in the killing of President Kennedy? It is possible that 2 persons acting independently attempted to shoot the president at the very same time. It is possible. It's not at all likely. So that sometimes those who deny conspiracies create the most convoluted fantasies of all.
He had jokes.
David Garrow, who wrote a biography of Martin Luther King, benignly, patronizingly looks at the
also assassinated by a lone gunman.
at the public mind, and he says that the evidence pointing to a conspiracy to murder Martin Luther King, you see what it is, a large majority of the American people do believe in assassination conspiracies. That allows events to have large, mysterious causes instead of small, idiosyncratic ones. I would say the Washington Post had the most mysterious cause of all a few minutes ago. They like that. They like the large causes. You see, but the question of conspiracy has to be decided by an investigation of evidence, not by a priori unscientific and patronizing presumptions about the public mind.
Kind of thing.
In any case, the evidence in King's assassination doesn't involve large, mysterious causes, but very immediate actualities. And the investigators, like Peter Dale Scott and Harold Weisberger and Mark Lane, they weren't impelled by some yearnings, you see. They were impelled by questions of evidence, by things that didn't just seem to make sense, by very immediate empirical things, which drew them into this more and more. But which these people who never read that evidence don't have to deal with, and so they can fashion all these theories.
To talk you through all this.
The independent.
Who is that? I gotta make this separate. Sorry, a little slow here. GMO Radio, thanks for the gifted sub to Jim Garrison. Wow, thank you.
Investigators demolished the Warren Commission. The first and most effective, perhaps, was Harold Weisberg's book, Whitewash, and then the other one by Mark Lane, Rush to Judgment. Terrific, written 25 years ago. Let's focus on a small part of the actual conspiracy. I can't obviously go through it all. It would take ages. Let's start with Oswald. If you watch television this week, you again, for the 78th time, heard that Oswald was a loner and incompetent, not very bright. You heard he was emotionally disturbed. Gerald Posner got on there, turning instant psychiatrist, and he said, Lee Harvey Oswald was a very disturbed young boy. He had a very disturbed childhood, and he was a passive-aggressive. I said, passive-aggressive? A passive-aggressive assassin? How does that... That explains why he used a rifle which couldn't shoot straight. He also was a leftist. Alexander Coburn has joined the right and the center, and in a column in the Examiner said he was a leftist.
Big leftist. He was a big pro-Castro guy, and he just happened to share office space with a bunch of anti-Castro guys. That's called reaching across the aisle to all these conspiracy cranks. Okay? Real estate is not, office space is not cheap. Office space is not cheap, so that's why he, as a pro-Castro activist from the Office of Naval Intelligence, shared office space with a group of anti-Castro fanatics. Makes perfect sense. He's a true bipartisan.
The truth is something else. Lee Harvey Oswald, all his IQ tests show that he was above average intelligence. He was a bright guy, a quick learner. Lee Harvey Oswald spent most of his adult life not as a lonely drifter, but directly linked to the U.S. intelligence community. At the age of 18 in the U.S. Marines, he had secret security clearance, and he was working at Marine Air Control in Atsugi base in Japan. Atsugi was a top secret base where the CIA launched some of its U-2 flights
on Chomsky in this,
and did other kinds of covert operations in China. The next year, at the age of 19, he was assigned to El Toro Air Station in California with security clearance to work radar. And here he emerged, certain strange things began to happen. He emerged as a babbling Russophile and Soviet communist. He started playing Russian language records at blast level in his barracks. He started addressing his fellow Marines in Russian. He read Russian books and touted Soviet communism as, quote, the best system in the world. He called his fellow Marines comrades. Now, the U.S. Marine Corps in 1958 was not exactly known as a bastion of liberal tolerance and free thinking.
Chomsky does the same thing with 9/11.
My buddy
but
Bernard
it's
Livingston
bad.
wrote a
Who
book called
cares?
Closet Red. He tells of his experiences in
It's
the
actually
army
good
where
to
they
know
had to
whether
filter
the
out
America
anybody who
underwent
had
a coup
funny
d'etat
opinions,
in
who had
1963
pinko-ish
or not.
opinions or whatever else. They had to
It's
be
actually pretty
reported.
important.
That the army constantly, and I'm sure the Marines constantly surveils anybody who might outspokenly or actively begin to say or act certainly in the way he did. But in this instance, Oswald's Marine commanders
Handing out fair play for Cuba leaflets in the morning, having drinks with anti-Castro terrorists in the evening. Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
didn't mind. He kept his security clearance. He kept all the radar records. He could see what was going in and out and knew all about the things that were happening there. And he had a wealth of sensitive radar information and other highly sensitive information from sensitive bases, black operations as they were called. Well, if Oswald was a Soviet spy or a Cuban spy, as some people now claim, he certainly had a novel way of building a cover. Other odd things began happening.
Because that's how ridiculous it is. Everyone's laughing because it's so absurd. When you take all these things and just say, here's the official version of this story, and you say all the stuff about Oswald, about Kennedy, the autopsy, whatever else, and people laugh because it's ridiculous. Because only a fool and a rube would ever actually believe this. This absolute bullshit.
In February 1959, Lee Harvey Oswald failed the Marine Corps proficiency test in Russian. 6 months later, he was practically fluent in Russian. Only in 1974, a document that was dislodged from the Warren Commission that had been secreted thanks to Howard Weisberg's legal efforts got the document out. It was shown that Oswald had attended the U.S. Army Monterey School of Languages. Now, Monterey is not open to anyone who just happens to have a hobby, a language hobby. You go only for serious training, and you are sent by the government, and it must be related to government work in a language picked by the government, which is related to specific assignments. So Oswald learned Russian at the U.S. Monterey
the Office of
School
Naval
Languages.
Intelligence.
Another odd thing, Oswald was given an early discharge from the Marines because his mother had injured her foot. That's called a dependency discharge. Your parent needs you. A jar had fallen on her toe. And he put in the request and he got it within a week. His fellow Marines were astonished at the velocity of the release. It also so happened that the jar fell on her foot a year before the discharge. But it wasn't healing right, you know. This was only one of a number of very strangely favorable treatments that the U.S. government began to give Lee Harvey Oswald. He then defected to the USSR. But how? Philip Melanson raises the question. To get to Russia in those days, it would have cost $1,500. Lee Harvey Oswald's bank account showed a deposit of only $203. After he arrived in London and was there, he left London and went to Helsinki on October 11, on a day when there were no available commercial flights that would have allowed him to make it in one day. He had some kind of private transportation to get to Helsinki. In Russia, he announced that he was renouncing his U.S. citizenship and that he had lots of secrets that he was going to give to the Soviets. He even went into the U.S. Embassy and announced that and made sure they all knew it. The Soviets didn't bite. They let him stay, but they at no time thought he could be an agent of any use to them. They kept him under constant surveillance. He worked in a factory. He showed no particular interest in guns, but he belonged to the factory's gun club. He used to join in the rabbit shoots, and he could never hit the rabbit. Always someone had to come behind him and shoot the rabbit while he was firing. Otherwise, they would have been there all day. It was a joke. He was a miserable marksman, as he had been in the U.S. Marines. He had been flagged again and again. He missed the whole target a number of times. You get the flag. So Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't hit the side of a barn. Now, if Lee Harvey Oswald was really a defector and not a U.S. spy, then U.S. intelligence could well have taken the view that his was one of the most damaging defections in history. Now, what's done in all defections, especially definitely those connected with government and military, is that there's a damage assessment. No damage assessment was ever made on Oswald's defection. This did come out in the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee. There was no damage assessment. Guess it was just overlooked. We don't know. After 2.5 years, he applies to return to the U.S. This is after renouncing his citizenship, announcing he was going to give away secrets. And instead of being grabbed when he comes out, and tried as a traitor, the U.S. accepts him back. And he says he was never debriefed. In fact, he was debriefed in Holland, in Amsterdam, but the CIA has no record of debriefing him, doesn't know who he is, never touched him, was never near him. And their explanation before the commission was that there were so many tourists
This is some guy,
coming in and
Rob
out,
Russo, some
that there was
leftist based
nothing
in
particularly
Canada.
about him
I
that
was turned on to
would
this
catch our
sick
attention.
individual,
One might wonder
and I found
what is
this.
needed to catch your attention. A defector, secrets, all that. After the assassination, the CIA claimed that they suspected that he was a Soviet spy. They still didn't debrief him, then that makes it even more curious. He gets out of Russia, and what does the State Department do? They give him money. They give him money to travel back to the U.S. and get set up. They pay all his travel and moving expenses and those of his wife's.
Who do we got? Oh, I'm so
He's
sorry.
given back his passport with full rights to
I'm so sorry. Hello, folks. Hello, Majority Report. What is up? Thank you for joining. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I was just making some French fries. I got an injury. Right now. I'm just making some French fries so I can munch on. We're just talking about JFK. It's the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination, a.k.a. the coup d'etat that took place in which the Nazi faction of the United States intelligence and security apparatus conspired to assassinate John F. Kennedy and fully take full grip of the levers of the security apparatus in the U.S., which they then used to carry out genocidal anti-communist campaigns throughout Southeast Asia and Latin America. And we're just listening to Michael Parenti's speech about this. It's a speech from the 30th anniversary of the assassination. The speech is called JFK Assassination and the Gangster State. So we're just giving a listen to that. We're talking a little bit about all the conspiracies and all the theories. And I was talking about how it's just, when you actually put it out there, how ridiculous it is. Because, when you take a look at all the separate facts, whether it's about Lee Harvey Oswald, whether it's about the actual assassination, the autopsy, none of it makes sense. It's laughably ridiculous. And that should be anyone's reaction to it. Yeah, I can link it. I'm really sorry. I'm dealing with a kind of somewhat serious medical issue here, and my hand is completely fucked, and it's hard for me to do basically anything. That's the link to the speech. Here it goes. We got another 25 minutes or so in this. Let's continue. Thanks again for the raid. I appreciate it.
travel anywhere.
And if you want to support TRRS with a sub or a donation, I would appreciate it. I'm hurt and injured and in pain. So if you even if you don't like the show and you just want to take pity on me, you could do that. Did you hurt your hand fighting? Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. Anyway, here's the speech.
Anywhere. And denounce the U.S. government again, someplace else. His wife is exempted from usual immigration quotas. No waiting. No exclusion for having belonged to the Soviet Komsomol, which is the Communist Youth Organization, which is a violation of U.S. immigration laws. Yet she was allowed in. Once back in Dallas, Lee Harvey Oswald settles in under the wing of one George de Mohrenschildt, a right-wing Russian with CIA ties. And this begins a whole pattern that goes on in Dallas and New Orleans, namely short-lived forays out into the public eye as a leftist. He starts a one-person Fair Play for Cuba organization in New Orleans, never has another member, never recruits another member. All his time in New Orleans and in Dallas, he never once contacts a single member of the Communist Party or any other left organization. Although he writes lots of letters to the Communist Party USA and to the Socialist Workers' Party, two groups which at that time weren't even talking to each other. Say, dear comrades, how are you? We fight forward and we go on. Yes, what should I do? And this and that. Send me instructions, you know. He blazes a trail, local TV, fistfights, inflammatory incidents, leaflets. One of the leaflets shows that his organization was on Camp Street, in the very same building that Guy Bannister had his office. Guy Bannister was an FBI agent, and a whole bunch of other Cuban emigre right-wing groups were there. And his personal relations were with right-wing anti-communist Cubans or with right-wing crypto-fascists or CIA types or others. George Demoranchine, as I said. David Ferry, he was a friend of David Ferry's. Robert Murrow, a right-winger. Very interesting credibility because Murrow is a right-winger. He's a businessman who worked for the CIA. And when he was in the CIA, he was a pilot, and one of the guys he worked with was David Ferry. It was known that David Ferry was CIA. He also knew, Lee Harvey Oswald knew Guy Bannister and knew Clay Shaw. So while he supposedly was this leftist, and if you ever heard any of the tapes of him speaking and explaining what communism was or socialism was, it's laughable. It's this little rote, superficial thing. While he was a leftist, in fact, all his personal associations were with right-wing people linked to the intelligence community. He also knew Jack Ruby. Now, they would have us believe that this man who couldn't hit the side of the barn took a Manlinka Carcana rifle whose sights were not even set. An Italian weapon, by the way, which the Italians said, the weapon that never killed anyone on purpose. And he fired and killed the President of the United States. That he got a job just at that time at the Texas Book Depository 3 weeks before, when nobody knew that Kennedy's limousine was going to pass right in front of the depository. He got a job right there, and fortuitously happened to be up there that day. That he would forego shooting President Kennedy when he had a full body shot of him coming right at him down Houston Street, right toward the Texas Book Depository, where he could go at him like a shooting gallery that's coming closer and closer. Perfect, the ideal thing. He didn't shoot him then. He waited until the car turned at a 110-degree angle down Elm Street, and as he went by and had only his head and a little portion of his shoulders, and then firing through the trees, he rapidly got off 3 shots in a few seconds, something which the best marksmen in the country were not able to emulate until after much practice and after the sights on the Manlinka Carcana were reset and brought into a laboratory and fixed in there, and they had all sorts of remarks to make about the awful performance of this rifle. By the way, right through a tree that was later cut down. We are asked to believe that a bullet would go through John Kennedy, pose in midair for 2 seconds, change directions, and wound Governor Connolly in 2 places, and then reappear intact on a stretcher fallen out of Connolly's body. By the way, that's not true. It did not ever reappear on the stretcher as if fallen out of somebody's body. It had reappeared wedged into the side of the stretcher. It obviously had been pushed in there. So this was a bullet that jumped out of Connolly's body and wedged itself in the side of the stretcher. This magic bullet had a lot of magic in it. We're asked to believe that a treasure of physical evidence, the interior of the limousine, the presidential limousine itself, which would have all sorts of evidence, bits of shrapnel, whatever else, from bullet parts, blood, lines of fire, which was just accidentally taken, instantly torn out, destroyed, and totally rebuilt. That this was not a deliberate cover-up. That we're asked to believe that Kennedy's brain just disappeared. That the X-ray, which now shows a reconstructed head with no exit wound, is oddly taken with no jaw. So it could be anybody's. You can't do any kind of dental identification to see if that X-ray is President Kennedy's. That the autopsy was just botched innocently. We're asked to believe that Jack Ruby, a gambler and gangster with links to the Cuban exiles and an acquaintance of Oswald's, who once worked for Congressman Richard Nixon for the...
There he is. I think that's one aspect of the whole magic bullet idea that I don't buy that theory, Dan Wally, because like it was more than one shot. It was more than one shot. Like even in the Warren Commission, they suggested that it was 2 bullets that caused all this damage. But I think that's one underrated aspect. Like not only the trajectory of the bullet, which again strikes Kennedy in the upper back, exits through his throat, and then hits Governor Connolly like 4 separate times. But not only does it go through that trajectory, that impossible trajectory, but between the time of exiting Kennedy's throat and striking Connolly, it's like almost 2 seconds later. Now, again, I'm not a big marksman or weapons expert. My understanding about bullets, though, you know, the whole faster than a speeding bullet thing, is that it goes quite quickly. It's moving pretty quickly. So it exits Kennedy's throat and hits Connolly like a second and a half later. And then, yeah, like we were seeing in that scene from the film, passes through him like 4 different times. Passes through his body, goes through his body, into his wrist, and then down into the opposite thigh. Why'd they hide his brain? The whole autopsy thing is a whole separate aspect of it. And the doctors and the nurses who, when Kennedy was brought into the hospital with a massive gaping exit wound in the back of his head, repeat, an exit wound in the back of his head. And every doctor that was there, every nurse was like, wow, he had a big exit wound in the back of his head. His brain was practically falling out of the back of his head. And then they said the next day, oh, actually, we made a mistake there. It was actually an entrance wound. No, we got that one wrong, actually. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I don't think it does line up, James. The doctor pointing his right temple at the first press conference was kind of revealing. Yeah, all these experts initially said he got shot in the front. There's an exit wound in the back. And then the next day we're all like, oh, no, we were mistaken, it turns out. Yeah, and then the bullet on the stretcher later, obviously, is incredibly suspicious as well.
House Un-American Activities Committee in Chicago when his name was still Jack Rubenstein, before he changed it to Ruby, were asked to believe that he just took it upon himself to kill Oswald because he was so moved by the suffering that Oswald had caused the Kennedy family. Although Ruby, a year later in jail, repeatedly kept alluding to the fact that you don't know the whole story, there's much more behind all of this, there's something really deep and sinister here and all this, and he was just simply dismissed by a media that was taking its cues. We're asked that the 21 witnesses, persons otherwise related to the case in some close way, with some information, privy to some conversations, whatever else, all who've met violent deaths were part of a colossal coincidence, like the one the Washington Post was talking about. That later on in 1978, the second round of killings that started after the House Select Committee investigation, 16 more who died violently.
We're talking about the magic bullet. There's a theory around that people have the wrong positions. Between this and MK Ultra, I think we should rename Dulles Airport. I mean, not even this. The Dulles brothers were Nazis. Like that, it can't be stressed enough. John Dulles was maybe he wasn't a member of the Nazi party, but was doing business deals. They were the prominent Wall Street lawyers of the day. They were doing business with Nazis up until the very last moment when it became totally unacceptable to do so. During the end of the war, Dulles was going totally rogue, totally defying what FDR wanted, making all these side deals with prominent Nazis and SS people to bring them into the U.S. intelligence apparatus. Operation Sunrise. You know, it's not just that in MK Ultra, but it's like they're like literally Nazi sympathizers. The idea that he's been held up as being some kind of like important American figure is like, so it's a total indictment of the entire nation. Yeah, definitely, Dr. Maggot, there was something where they moved away from the hospital. Yeah, absolutely. And there was all these kinds of rules and regulations about the doctors doing the autopsy and everything that they brought in as well. Dulles knew about the concentration camps, and you know what he did with that intelligence? What he did not do was tell FDR about them. For sure, I mean, like I said, he was part of the wing of the U.S. government that was trying to do everything that they could to avoid going to war with the Nazis. Did do everything they could to avoid going to war with the Nazis, and then did everything they could to protect Nazis, bringing in these like SS figures, like I've been talking about lately, you know, Nuremberg and everything. There's this whole faction of the U.S. government that didn't even want there to be a Nuremberg. They wanted some people that are part of this kind of faction of the government wanted just Hitler to be removed and the Nazi regime to be kept in place. They wanted to make a separate peace deal with the Nazis and then work with the Nazis to fight the USSR. And FDR was basically, and his like allies in his faction were pretty much the only ones that kept that from happening.
They just happened to die coincidentally, violent deaths, including one of them being George de Mohrenschildt himself, killed by a gun blast to the head 3 hours after a House Assassinations Committee investigator had tried to contact him. He was being set up for an interview. He was being set up for a lot more than that. George Mohrenschildt was not only close to Oswald, but in his telephone book there was found an inscription or an insert to George Pappy Bush, that he was a close friend of George Bush, and there was a correspondence between them. The sheriff's office in Palm County, Florida, found that his shooting was very strange, and it was ruled a suicide. William Sullivan, a third guy in the FBI, who was supposed to appear before the House committee to talk. By the way, Sullivan was on CIA, according to Robert Murrow, he was on the CIA payroll. He was shot right outside his home by a man who claimed to have mistaken him for a deer. He was charged with misdemeanor and released in custody of his father, a state policeman. Sam Giancano, who died from natural causes when his heart stopped beating after a bullet went through it. One day before he was to testify about mob and CIA connections, while under government protection. And by the way, what comes out of this whole thing is the incredible linkages between the CIA and mob families and mob figures again and again. Because after all, the mob is very functional. They can do the kind of dirty things that the CIA may sometimes want them to do. Well, I have a whole bunch of other things, and I find I've run out of time. I can't believe it, but the people have spoken. The people have spoken. There are even some on the left, like Noam Chomsky and Alexander Cockburn, who argue that this whole interest in the assassination comes from a Kennedy revival, a Camelot yearning, the yearning for a lost Messiah. I'm giving quotes. These are quotes right from Chomsky. Cockburn and Chomsky and others have argued that Kennedy they challenged the notion that Kennedy was assassinated for intending to withdraw from Vietnam or undo the CIA or end the Cold War. These things could not have led to his downfall because they were not true. Kennedy was a Cold Warrior, a counterinsurgent who wanted a military withdrawal from Vietnam only with victory. I have argued similarly in my book, Democracy for the Few, that in fact, indeed, Kennedy was a Cold Warrior and a counterinsurgent, and that he should not be romanticized as a progressive. Chomsky, Cockburn, and others claim that the change of administration that came with JFK's assassination had no large-scale effect on policy, not even on tactics. In other words, if Kennedy had lived, he likely would have fabricated a Tonkin Gulf casus belli. He would have introduced ground troops in a massive land war, as Lyndon Johnson did. He would have engaged in the merciless B-52 carpet bombings of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, as Richard Nixon did. He would have risked destroying his own electoral base, proving himself a mass murderer as bad as Nixon. Chomsky and Cockburn don't tell us how they know that. All we know is the one surviving Kennedy, the Robert Kennedy, in fact went a different way. He became an anti-war critic. He opposed the war. He broke with the Johnson administration, and he said that his brother's administration committed terrible mistakes. The evidence we do have, in fact, is that John Kennedy observed Cambodian neutrality and negotiated a ceasefire and coalition government in Laos, which the CIA refused to honor. They preferred to back a right-wing faction that continued the war. Chomsky says much about troop withdrawal. He just wrote a whole book on this, Camelot Revisited and all that. But he says very little about troop escalation, other than to offer Roger Hilsman's speculation that Kennedy might well have introduced U.S. troops, ground troops in South Vietnam. Maybe so, maybe not. In fact, the same Hilsman noted in the New York Times not long ago, and Chomsky doesn't note it, that in 1963, Kennedy was the only person in his administration who opposed the introduction of U.S. ground troops. He was the only thing preventing an escalation of the war. Forget the question of withdrawal or not withdrawal. He was a barrier in that sense.
And worth talking about the whole Operation Northwoods angle as well. Operation Northwoods, which was a plot devised by the CIA, proposed to Kennedy, which Kennedy did not agree to, which suggested, among other things, carrying out false flag attacks involving hijacked airplanes, involving U.S. naval vessels being attacked that they could use to justify, in this case, a war against Cuba. Kennedy doesn't go along with this. And then shortly after his assassination, there's the whole Gulf of Tonkin incident. Like, well, wouldn't you know it? I guess we got to put troops in Vietnam now. golly gee whiz. And I wonder if there's any other incidences of, hijacked airplanes being used to stage false flag attacks that justified massive military industrial complex victories, creating massive quagmires and leading to invasions that had already been planned and hadn't been carried out. I wonder, has there ever been anything like that to happen? I don't know. I don't know. That doesn't sound familiar to me. Doesn't seem like anything to me. I honestly think this story is so ridiculous to send a message to all potential future presidents. We can and will do this to you if you step out of line and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, that's another one of my favorite people. Bill Hicks talked a lot about that. It's like when you get elected president, they bring you to a room and they show you a version of the Zapruder film from a different angle that you've never seen before. And at the end of the film, they say, "I have any questions?" I can't remember what the punchline is. It's like, wherever, just tell me where to sign the check. Something along those lines.
Whether or not there are certain left analysts who think Kennedy was or wasn't a progressive or liberal and thinks that the CIA had no reason to kill him or other people had no reason to be dissatisfied with him, the fact is, do they see it that way? Entrenched interests are notorious for not seeing the world the same way that left analysts do. In 1963, people in right-wing circles, including elements in various intelligence organizations, did not believe that Kennedy could be trusted with the nation's future. Now, some months ago on a San Francisco talk show, I heard a guy come on. It was on KGO, and he said, "I've never said this before. I never said it. It's the first time I'm saying it. But I worked for Army intelligence, and in 1963, I was in Japan. And the accepted word around then was that Kennedy would be killed because he was messing too much with the intelligence community. And when word came of his death, we were, all I could hear were delighted comments like, 'We got the bastard.'" What JFK's enemies saw what they saw was something different from what Chomsky and Coburn have seen. They fixed on Kennedy's refusal to provide air coverage to the Bay of Pigs, his refusal to go in with U.S. forces, his unwillingness to launch another invasion of Cuba, his no invasion guarantee to Khrushchev on Cuba, his atmospheric test ban treaty with Moscow, his American University speech calling for a re-examination of our Cold War attitudes toward the Soviet Union, his unwillingness to send ground forces in a massive form into Vietnam, his antitrust suit against General Electric, his fight with U.S. Steel over price increases, his challenge to the Federal Reserve Board, his warm reception at labor conventions, his call for racial equality and responsiveness to civil rights leaders, reluctant responsiveness, his talk of moving forward in a new frontier. Erwin Knoll, the progressive, admits he has no idea who killed Kennedy, but this doesn't keep him from asserting that the Oliver Stone film was manipulative and that Stone provided false answers. How do you know that, Erwin, if you have no idea who killed Kennedy? And the remarkable thing about Erwin Knoll and Noam Chomsky and Alexander Coburn is they don't know a damn thing about the criticisms and investigation that's been made. We've said this again and again. In the rebuttals and the exchange in the Nation, almost every one of them said Alexander Coburn doesn't know anything about this case. He doesn't know anything about Lee Harvey Oswald, really. He doesn't know just some of the questions I brought up. They don't know anything, and they never deny it. They never say anything. They go on with their patronizing comments. Well, Chomsky, patronization and condescension. Coburn with vitriol and venom. They go on attacking those who supposedly are idealizing Kennedy.
I think it's from 93.
Erwin Knoll shows he's flexible, though.
The 30th anniversary.
He says he allows that the Warren Commission did a hasty, slipshod job of investigation. I disagree. The Commission did a brilliant job of investigation. It sat for 51 long sessions over a period of several months, much longer than most major investigations. It compiled 26 volumes of testimony and evidence. It had the investigative resources of the FBI and CIA at its command. Far from being hasty
and... World War III in 1962. I mean, the same reason that they wanted World War III to start right away. Like, there's this faction of the U.S. government that we're talking about, right? That's what they wanted. That's why they bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the first place. And in Korea, the same faction. They wanted to nuke Korea and go after and nuke China and finish the job. They didn't want to have any Cold War. They wanted to finish the job. These people were constantly aiming to escalate that kind of war. Because imperialism's a hell of a drug. It turns men into bloodthirsty beasts, doesn't it?
And slipshod, it painstakingly crafted theories that moved toward its foreordained conclusion, that Oswald was the assassin. It framed an argument and moved unfailingly to fulfill that argument. It failed to call witnesses who saw something different from what it wanted to hear, who not only heard, but who saw people on the grassy knoll shooting. It failed to call them. It ignored or reinterpreted what little conflicting testimony that did creep into its proceedings. All this took deliberate
taking the
effort.
world with them. It's all in Dr. Strangelove.
It was carefully crafted, painstakingly. A hasty, slipshod investigation would show traces of randomness in its errors. Some would go this way, some would go that way. But the Commission's distortions consistently moved in the same direction in pursuit of a prefigured hypothesis. The gullible U.S. public that Erwin Knoll talks about. Knoll condemns Oliver Stone for playing on the gullibility of the American people. See, he's not
gullibility.
He's cool.
The Warren
He doesn't
Commission
fall for this. He's so cool he didn't even go see the movie. You
That's
see.
how anyone could ever believe that.
The U.S. public has not bought
imaginable.
The official explanation. 78% say they believe there was a conspiracy.
Marx as in
and both
Karl
Chomsky
Marx
and Coburn. Coburn in The Nation, Chomsky in Z Magazine, and again in a letter in exchange with me, both of them dismissed that fact and point out the same identical analog. They point out that, in fact, over 70% of the people also believe in miracles. So, what does that prove? And what does that got to do with the question at hand? That people can have a stupid opinion about one thing doesn't mean they're stupid about everything. In fact, Chomsky and Coburn are themselves evidence of that.
Oh, shit. Oh, my goodness.
In any case, the comparison is between two different things.
The gangster state.
They're comparing the public's gullibility about miracles with the public's unwillingness to be gullible about the official line of it being fed and shoved in their faces for 30 years. That's not gullibility at all. Alexander Coburn and Noam Chomsky have told us that we must not reduce great developments in history to conspiracy, for then we lose sight of institution, class, and other systemic factors of American capitalism. I don't need them to tell me about systemic factors in American capitalism. I use a structural analysis in all my writings. But investigating the JFK conspiracy, we are not looking for an escape from something unpleasant and difficult. That's psychiatrist Noam Chomsky speaking. But we're hitting upon the nature of state power in what is supposedly to be a democracy. Conspiracy is not something that's in contradistinction to structural analysis. It is part of it. These guys will use conspiracy, they will use legitimacy, they will finance elections, they will use publicity campaigns, they will set up liberalish organizations, they will set up alternative trade union movements, they will use assassins and death squads, they will use every single conceivable thing there is. And this was one of the things they used. When they had someone who was giving them trouble, when they had someone who was standing in their path because he was a little too bright and too shiny, when they had an agenda to save Southeast Asia from communism, they would kill one of their own. And that is a tremendous revelation. It was a startling revelation to the American public to make them realize what kind of a gangster government and national security state we really have in this country and what it does around the world.
That's a good point too. And you just look at what the CIA does around the world in terms of like the manipulation, the propaganda, the media manipulation, assassinations, fixing elections. It's like, oh, but they wouldn't do that here, of course. Of course, they're only doing that in Vietnam and in Chile and in Brazil and Greece and Korea and everywhere else you can possibly imagine where they've had those grubby little fingerprints for the last couple of decades. But they never do it here in the United States of America, though, of course. Of course. Of course they're doing that. Of course they're doing exactly that. They did it in fucking Australia.
A structuralist position should not discount the role of human agency in history. Institutions are not self-generating forces. The great continuities of corporate and class interest, that's Coburn's phrase, do not happen of their own accord like reified, disembodied social forces. Neither empires nor national security institutions come into existence in a fit of absent-mindedness. Although the British elites used to say that, the British Empire was accumulated in a fit of absent-mindedness. Give me a break, as these guys plotted and killed and brought armies in and destroyed and bribed and murdered and lied and did all the things and plundered these countries and plundered them. Absent-minded? God knows when you focused your attention what you would do. There's a conscious interest being pursued here, and the evidence for it is the state itself. These people created willfully intended, these events are created by willfully intended policymakers who pursue specific interests. It is the essence of the state and the function of state institutions to act as conscious agents in recreating the conditions of politico-economic hegemony. That's what it's there for. That's what they're paid to do. To achieve their goals, state leaders, especially those within the national security state, will resort to every necessary form of mass manipulation, deception, and violence, even against one of their own, whom they have come to see as a liability. Conspiratorial action, brothers and sisters, is not something separate and exclusive of institutional presence. In fact, there's a constant interplay between the two. And by the way, all this call for constructual analysis, institutional analysis. Where's the institutional analysis in the nation? All you get are conspiracies, inside intrigues, events, happenings, articles preoccupied with immediate policies, issues, events, personalities, secret deals, all that kind of stuff. All of them of vastly lesser magnitude than JFK assassination. And yet in 30 years, the Nation and the Progressive have never published a single word by investigators like Peter Dale Scott and such, except a letter to the editor once in a while. Now, let me quote from Peter's book, Deep Politics. He raises this question of conspiracy, and he points out that G. William Domhoff makes a point very much like Coburn's. He says, and Peter, I think, makes a point very much like the one I made, which I was quoting from, which was in my exchange with Chomsky in Z Magazine, and also with Chomsky, and also in The Nation, in my exchange with Coburn. I made this point that conspiracy and institution are not mutually exclusive. And they never have answered or addressed that point, either to rebut it or to accept it or to see how it doesn't apply here or does apply, whatever. They just ignore it. Domhoff points out, if conspiracy means that these men, meaning the ruling elites, are aware of their interests, know each other personally, meet together privately and off the record, and try to hammer out a consensus on how to anticipate and react to events and issues, then there is some conspiring that goes on in the Council for Foreign Relations, not to mention the Committee for Economic Development, the Business Council, the National Security Council, and the Central Intelligence Agencies. But then Scott goes on to show that Domhoff shares that same kind of resistance that Coburn and Chomsky have to the idea that an assassination conspiracy could have a lasting impact on our political arrangements. We all have a tremendous tendency to want to get caught up in believing that there's some secret evil cause for all of the obvious ills of the world. Conspiracy theories encourage a belief that if we get rid of a few bad people, everything will be well in the world. He's quoting Domhoff. Then Peter answers that I believe that a true understanding of the Kennedy assassination will lead not to a few bad people, but to the institutional and parapolitical arrangements which constitute the way we are systematically governed. The conspiracies I see as operative, in other words, are part of our political structure, not exceptions to it. That's Peter Dale Scott. What the left critics do is that they mistaken the low political value of the victim, JFK, whom they hate and detest. Their big fear is that you're going to like him, with the high political importance of the issue and the implications for democracy, the revelation of the gangster nature of the state. I mean, Captain Alfred Dreyfus, back in 1894, was a conservative militarist. Clemenceau once conjectured that if his name had not been Dreyfus, he would have been an anti-Dreyfusard. Does that mean that the political struggle waged in L'Affaire Dreyfus was a waste of time? The issue was quickly drawn between the right and the left, between those who stood with the army and those who stood with the republic itself and with justice. The same with Benigno Aquino. Aquino was a member of the privileged class in the Philippines. He promised no great structural changes. He was even more conservative than Kennedy. Does this mean that the Filipino people should have dismissed the conspiracy that led to his assassination as an event of no experience? So, just another ruling class pig, what do we care? Instead, they used it as ammunition against the hated Marcos regime, as a revelation of what that government was really doing. Archbishop Romero of El Salvador, he was a member of the Salvadoran aristocracy. He could not have made it to the top of the church hierarchy otherwise. When he was ordained, they came with presents. They hugged and kissed him. And the minute he opened up his mouth and made some critical remarks about the war and some favorable remarks about the poor, he was assassinated. I doubt if he hadn't been assassinated, the Salvadoran history would have been much different. Does this mean that solidarity groups in this country and in El Salvador should not have tried to make his murder an issue that revealed the homicidal gangster nature of the Salvadoran state? Instead of seizing the opportunity, some left-writers condescendingly ascribe a host of mass psychology motivations and emotional needs to those of us who are concerned about the JFK assassination. They psychologize about our illusions, our false dreams, our longings for messiahs and father figures, and our inability to face unpleasant realities the way they can. They deliver patronizing admonitions about our conspiracy captivation and Camelot yearnings. They urge us not to escape into fantasy. They are the cognoscenti who guide us and outleft us on the JFK assassination, a subject about which they don't know a goddamn thing, and whose significance they will never be able and have not been able to grasp. I have a different name for our interests.
Destroy.
It is not JFK worship, it's not Camelot yearnings, as the left critics would say. It's not big evils and conspiracy titillation, as the mainstream media would say. Our interest is born of democratic struggle, a desire to know what is going on, a desire to have rulers who are worthy of our name and the name of democracy. Thank you.
Great ending. You know, sorry, this is totally off topic. He really goes for broke there at the end. This is kind of off topic. All this stuff about like trans kids and like how we're teaching kids to break down gender roles and we're doing this and all the freak out about that. You see JFK Jr., they used to put kids in these like little dresses like all the time. That was like a really common thing in the past. It's only recently that we stopped doing that. So it's funny, the idea that like it's this new crazy thing to, if a kid puts on a dress, their gender is just gonna be forever just destroyed or whatever it is. Back when boys wearing skirts wasn't gay because of woke. Like that used to be like a really common thing. Anyways. They dress kids under 5 basically the same. That's what I mean. Yeah. Anyway, that was a really great speech. I wonder if there's one more thing. Oh. I wanted to see if I could find the thing about Parenti where he talks about conspiracy, you know, the smoke-filled rooms. Conspiracy and class power. That's a whole other hour-long lecture. Oh, here we go. This might be it.
Well, people sometimes say to me, well, what do you have, a conspiracy theory? Do you think there's some, do you think these leaders are just deliberately trying to manipulate the whole world just to suit themselves? What do you say? Conspiracy theorists. How do you like that? I mean, do you think there's actually a group of men sitting in a room who sit there and are plotting these things? For some reason, do you hear that? You have that up here? You think there's a group of people sitting around in a room? But somehow that image is supposed to be very compelling, you know? So improbable. And I always say, oh, no, they don't sit around in a room. They meet on carousels and they talk to each other that way. Or they do, what do they call that?
Where else are they supposed to meet?
Free falling. No, what do you, with the parachute guys? They all lock arms. You see those parachutes? What? Skydivers. They all skydive. You see them locking arms. What do you think they're talking about when they're all locked arms like that? That's where they meet. Of course they meet in rooms. Where the hell else do you think they're going to meet?
Shareholder meetings, boardrooms. Country clubs.
Do you have a stochastic theory? There's a word. Look it up. Stochasticism is the theory that everything
nice
happens
cut,
by
man.
chance.
I would really love to go myself. I'd like to make a pilgrimage there
So
myself.
you have a coincidence theory? Stuff just happens. Oh, George the first wanted to bomb Iraq. George the second wants to bomb. It just must run in the family.
Now they need a Discord to scheme, exactly. Yeah, that was great stuff. We got one more Bill Hicks clip to look at. I think this is the one we were referencing as a way to scare new other presidents.
I have this feeling, man, because there's a handful of people actually run everything. That's true. It's provable. It's not I'm not a conspiracy nut. It's provable. Handful, very small elite run and own these corporations, which include the mainstream media. I have this feeling who's ever elected president, like Clinton was, no matter what your promises you promise on the campaign trail, blah, 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 when you win, you go into this smoky room with the 12 industrialist, capitalist scumfucks who got you in there, and you're in this smoky room, and this little film screen comes down, and a big guy in a cigar, roll the film. And it's a shot of the Kennedy assassination from an angle you've never seen before. It looks suspiciously off the grassy knoll. And then the screen goes up, and the lights come up, and they go to the new president. Any questions? Just what my agenda is. First we bomb Baghdad. You got it.
There it is. There it is. Oh, they found a Yemeni passport at the site of that car explosion. That's interesting. We were hearing all kinds of interesting comments from people like that Malcolm Nance guy. Oh, there's going to be a Hamas attack. There's going to be a Hamas attack any day now. Very interesting. I have no doubt that they did find a Yemeni passport there. I'm sure they're going to find a little Hamas headband as well. The law enforcement, say what you will about our law enforcement institutions, they're great at finding intact passports at the site of explosions, definitely. Yeah, there's a Hamas headband and an ISIS flag as well. And also a swastika, a copy of Mein Kampf as well. And some crack sprinkled over the dead body. Let's just sprinkle some crack over him and get out of here. There's a Hamas tunnel under the car. There we go. Very interesting. Wearing a keffiyeh in the passport photo. So that's great. It's like that's American engineering, Marty. How well built these passports are. They won't even survive a blast from a bomb. Unbelievable. It was a dash of the Islamo-Commie Nazis. Is the MS-13 Islamo-Commie Nazis? That's right. The timing, too, with the world turning on Zionism, it is interesting. And we've had, they've been saying it. Malcolm Nance and people are saying, like, and there could be an attack anytime. There could be a Hamas attack in the West. Very interesting. I'm sure we're gonna find more details on that later on. I don't think I'm gonna be around tomorrow. Maybe, but I don't really think so. We'll have to see how it goes. It was fun to talk about all this stuff as always. I'm not very sharp today because I'm just not feeling well. And I think for that reason I'm gonna get going soon. They say the bomber got out of the car to tear down a kidnapped poster before getting back in the car and detonating the bomb. That sounds about right. That sounds about right. The car didn't even denounce Hamas. So I got to get going soon, folks. I'm a mere 26. I'm a mere 26 subs away from the goal. So if you've enjoyed this program today, please, if you can, it was a falafel vendor. There we go. It was a halal cart guy. As they were dying, they tweeted, "From the river to the sea at Eve Fartlow." That's right. It's very suspicious. Very suspicious. Folks, if you can please subscribe to TRRS. Every little bit helps. It's the only way I'm able to keep doing these shows. Again, if you like the program, if you tuned in today or this week or over the last month, and you've appreciated the coverage I've been doing of all the major geopolitical happenings that are going on right now, please subscribe. It helps out a lot. It's the only way I'm able to keep doing this show. And like I said before, even if you don't like the show and you just want to take pity on me, the fact that I'm in extreme pain and have been for this entire time, to the point that I haven't been able to even talk a lot of the time because I've got severe pain just radiating in waves from my fucking hand, my right hand, which I need to do everything, you know. So if you can, folks, please subscribe. Please support the community and support the show that we do on here every single day.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
It means a lot, and I appreciate it a lot. Maverick, thanks for 3 gifted subs. Very kind of you, Maverick. Thank you. What happened is I've got a messed up body. That's what happened. And sometimes I just wake up in unimaginable pain.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob
An
to
uncaring
talk you through
universe
all
happened.
this.
That's right. Eigenbat, thanks for the gifted sub as well. Excited for next Friday's announcement that the bomber was known and suspected by the FBI, for sure. Truth Teller injures his posting hand on a JFK day. That's right. I show up with my arm in a cast and I'm like, it was a lone assassin. It was a lone gunman. There's no conspiracy. Please go home. Go back to bed, America. Go back to put on American Gladiators. And now a mere 22 subs to go. A mere measly 22 subs to go. So if you can, folks, please subscribe to TRRS. Oh, I really appreciate everyone that can support this program. It's the only way that I'm able to continue to do this show each and every day. Bought off one of the precious Michaels. Like we were saying, even with the whole magic bullet thing, like it's not even about maybe the positions were different than the way that was described. Maybe there's a way if you line up the people exactly, the injuries make sense. It still doesn't make sense that Kennedy was shot in the back and then the bullet exited his throat. Maybe. And then strikes Governor Connolly like 6 separate times. I don't know. And exits his throat and strikes Connolly almost 2 seconds later. My aching right knee woke me up in the middle of the night after it was fine when I fell asleep. So as a fellow old guy, I hear you. I got knee issues too. I'm really just falling apart. I got to start taking care of myself, which I've been saying for a while and not doing. I got to start taking care of myself. I got to start doing yoga. I got to lose some weight. I got to go to the doctor and get checked out. I probably need to be on like medication for the rest of my life. And I'm just not doing it. I'm just not doing it. You know, it's been fucking years I've been dealing with stuff and I just have not dealt with it. Yeah, what's next? Stop eating crap? It's not even, like, my diet is not even that bad. Like, I cook 4 or 5 nights a week. I eat fresh food, lots of vegetables, but even the stuff that I eat apparently is not good for me to eat. But it's like, fuck, I like it though. I like that stuff. What, am I supposed to just eat like oats all day or something? What, am I a horse? Am I a rabbit? Your diet is very good. I wouldn't say it's very good, but it's not like I'm sitting around just eating junk all day. I eat lots of fresh food and vegetables and I'm cooking all the time, and maybe it is the Diet Coke. If it was, I would quit Diet Coke and diet soda if that's what the culprit was. Have you tried horse paste to protect you from COVID and wokeness? Quaker Oat Sky is offended. I don't think you can really even. It's barely even swollen. I can't tell. I think my hands look the same. But this is just fucked. I can barely use this hand. They look enormous. I just have big hands, though. They're always like that. I got a bunch of bok choy in my CSA this week, making some fire dishes. What's a CSA? I eat so much bok choy. I went from eating 0 bok choy to eating bok choy like with almost every single meal. You joked about the King Charles fingers, and now here we are. Community supported agriculture. We get a box every week. Oh, that's really cool. Love bok choy. Yeah, you throw it in a wok or a pan with some sesame oil and soy sauce. It's a really good step to add some water too. Like you saute it just a little while. Saute it just for like 4 or 5 minutes. Then add a little bit of water so it steams it, and then the water reduces. Really good stuff. Crisp it up, then steam it. That's exactly right. That's exactly what you got to do. So is there any other brave hero that wants to support the show and that wants to take pity on me?
You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Does anyone else want to take pity on me? Because I'm just injured. I'm just injured and in pain, and I don't think I'll be here tomorrow either. Bleep Lord, thanks for the 2 gifted subs. Thank you, Bleep Lord. I appreciate that a lot. And now only 20 subs to go. Only 20 subs to go to get to the goal. It's within grasp now. Not that I could grasp it. Even if I wanted to grasp the sub goal, I physically can't. I physically cannot do that. Ugh. Sometimes I'm like, it might be feeling better. I think, maybe. And then I move it the wrong way, and it's just like, well, that's the worst pain I've ever experienced. Thank you, Up the Reds. I appreciate it a lot. I'm grateful for you too. Thank you. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Like I said, I'm lucky that it's only a few weeks out of the year that I feel like this. Could be worse. Could be a lot worse. Yeah, we have walk-in clinics here. Yeah. Yeah, everyone always tells me to go to the doctor. I get it, okay? I understand. Believe me, I know. I know, okay? I have weird psychological blockages sometimes. Okay? When it comes to dealing with both physical issues and mental issues. All right? I'm sorry. I know I need to go to the doctor. Believe me, I've heard it before. I've heard it all before. I do too, Rob. It's okay. But Dr. Maggot, you're already a doctor. You can just investigate yourself. You can do a self checkup. The doc will just tell you, go woke, go broke. That's right. My fellow doctor neater, just woefully irresponsible. I'm only legally allowed to do health checkups on maggots. Okay, I'm sorry to hear that, Dr. Maggot. I'll see what I can do, okay? luckily I don't have insurance, so I never get to find out what's wrong with me. God, I wish that were me. You found a loophole, Matt. So does anyone else, one final plea, does anyone else want to support this program with a sub or a donation, gifted subs, bits? I'm too fucked up feeling to just stick around. A measly 20 subs, that's right. Well, $4.10, that sounds scary, yeah.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Pete Cicada, thanks for the gifted sub. Very kind of you. Thank you. We're gonna raid David Tovaresh again. This is still fun. You know, I was not feeling very great today, but still enjoyed hanging out and talking about all this stuff. It's always a pleasure to hang out with each and every one of you. That's all. I'm going to go. Take care, gang.